Hi everyone, I'm a lived experience peer worker and Warren Academy's head Hare Phoebe. As someone who's received the diagnosis of a schizoaffective disorder, a schizophrenia and bipolar, amongst other things, I'm often asked, one question I'm often asked is, what's the worst part of schizophrenia for you? I could have numerous answers to that depending on where I am, who's asking, and with what background knowledge and what environment I'm in. Today's answer is one that I often give, and that what's most difficult for me is not what most people think the symptoms of schizophrenia, and you notice I do the hand quote unquote there because these aren't actually terms that I align with. I find the very idea and also the phrase schizophrenia quite stigmatizing in itself, and I find a lot of terms that we use today without thinking very critically about to be quite oppressive terms, and so I would like to put that out there. Not even that keen on the words symptoms, but for the purpose of this video, the things I like to call them expressions or threat responses that I experience as part of my emotional landscape that's labelled in the clinical world as schizophrenia. So what is the worst part of this experience for me? Well, the worst part is not the kooky, strange little sensory, emotional, psychological experiences that I go through. In fact, in relative terms, comparative to other things, that's a walk in the park. Because I have some self-mastery and I'm actually having a wonderful, thriving life. I love life, and there isn't very much that makes me struggle to the point of giving up or stepping back from life long term. What I find enormously challenging very often is the attitudes, stereotyping, binaries, stigma, prejudice, discrimination, injustices, and structural oppressors that are elicited by this social label that I have been permanently given. And what I mean by that is it can be very hard to get places in the working world when you have certain histories and you have to decide which bits of yourself to out for which jobs. You have a resume that will only be understood in certain sectors. You can't get life insurance, or when you can finally, speaking from experience after 12 phone calls and being told continuously that you're uninsurable, because I fit the two worst labels that freak out insurance companies, then when I do find one to give me a policy, I have to pay twice what everyone else does. And very often the people in that position often are working less hours than others and are the ones that can least afford life insurance, and we're the ones that pay double, or if not at least the third or a quarter more than anyone else. It's not an equitable system. Our insurance industry is even in bed with this whole oppressing thing that we do in how we view people with certain emotional landscapes, and so those things are crushing. There are numerous examples I could give, and maybe to top this off, part of that distress, and a good example is when you're recovering and you manage at one point to get a job, pretty menial job, it's something that you're very well capable of, and when it's discovered that you have a particular diagnosis, you have your employment terminated on the spot. What I find very difficult to deal with is the way that the world both views and treats me. What's really, really difficult is the distress that is caused by our structures and systems. And in fact, the distress caused by those experiences of social injustice and that type of oppression is as, and if not in some cases, more distressing than what people refer to as my symptoms from day to day. In fact, I'll also go as far as to say that it is that type of distress that very often is what maintains a person in this holding pattern of being in distress, in services, in treatment, discharged, readmitted, and getting embrangled in that life. That is how we maintain distress. We can maintain distress with our oppressive language and our oppressive treatments and systems and our oppressive attitudes and our assumptions about what's difficult for people and what isn't. A great question I once got was, do you believe that you're crazy? It's a fantastic question for so many reasons, and it's something that we should all be talking about. However, my answer's sort of twofold, and it depends on, again, who's asking and what their background knowledge is. So depending on who you are watching this video, if you're familiar with an area of academic study called mad studies, a madness language and long historic activist movement that is really rooted in anti-psychiatry sentiment, you would know that madness is a reclaimed word, and it's something that I can use about myself. I have madness. I am mad. I am absolutely crazy. It is one of the most meaningful things in my life. It can be both stressful, enlightening, thriving, and challenging being mad. And the classic movement, madness movement, and the mad pride response to that is that just because I'm mad doesn't mean that I have a mental illness. Being mad doesn't make you ill. It makes you mad. And I think that we should appreciate people who are mad. We should appreciate madness. And the best way to appreciate it is to learn how to understand it and apply some critical thought to these things that we call mental illness and symptoms and treatments, and look at our entire mental health system around us and what our attitudes are and how we approach people. So yes, I am completely mad. And it is both wonderful and challenging, difficult and rewarding, and I wouldn't have it any other way. So conversely, the other answer to the question, do you think you're crazy, would be absolutely not. If that is being asked of me by someone who thinks that the word crazy is synonymous with mentally ill, unhinged, unhealthy, in crisis, and a whole horde of other things, I would say no. I'm Phoebe, and I think and feel and behave and have the views that I have, and just because some of those views might not be shared by doctors and clinicians, it's not necessarily me that lacks any insight. In fact, I would put it to our medical, clinical professions that perhaps a larger area of the lack of insight lays within clinical models. Again, that would be a different video. No, not crazy at all. So this is a question that some people are afraid to ask, and they shouldn't be, because if we don't ask questions, we don't find out the answers. We don't get educated. We don't then think about that answer, reflect. We don't learn anything. So I was glad that one day I was finally asked this question because I was able to talk about it. Yes, I have normal and romantic and intimate relationships. As it happened, I've been married, it'll be coming up nearly 25 years. I met my husband when I was 19 and we've been together ever since. I'm also the mother of a beautiful 5-year-old child. I do have sex. Do have a sex life. I do romantic things and I go out to dinner, I go dancing, I buy nice lingerie, we have date nights. And even before I met my husband, I was out dating, doing all the things that teenagers do. And I had mental and emotional challenges and issues then, and I'm still able to do that normal part of being human. I'm no different to anyone else, and I appreciate that some people do wonder, because some people who have the diagnostic social labels that I have struggle more at certain times in those life, and people may ask them those questions at that time when it appears that the functioning, I'm too keen on the word functioning, is very limited, and it's natural to be curious. Now, do these people been married, and oh, have you got that diagnosis? Have have you been engaged before? And you hear all these conversations, and I think it's a great question to ask. I'm just the same as everybody else. That's not a very interesting answer, but that in itself is probably quite stigma busting. People who have a label of schizophrenia do things in much the same way as everybody else. So yeah, the answer is yes. Normal, intimate and sexual relationships. In fact, married and a mother. So this is a question that I think most people have an assumption of the answer, which is probably a pretty good judgment, because it can be very hard to hold down a job with any health issue, life issue, a social issue, intellectual issue. Of course it can, and I think that there are. So I'm going to answer in two parts. Initially, yes, it was very hard to hold down a job. You heard me during an earlier question saying that I had an employment terminated when my diagnosis was revealed. In fact, that's happened twice. So I'm feeling it's a relatively regular occurrence, and I hear so from peers in my sector as well. It can be enormously challenging, because even when you go to interviews, if you've had a long gap in your work history, you have to be able to answer that question in a way that convinces a potential employer that you're a good candidate and worthy of being given a job. And how you decide to tackle it, a white lie or a flat out lie, or honesty with a really big explanation, or can I skip that question, please? Yeah, so it's sometimes challenging to get a job in the first place. I think is probably an equally good question, and obviously difficult to hold down a job, because when you do have days where you are really functioning less well in terms of your perseverance and resilience, you might take days off. I think what surprises a lot of people is that many people of lived experience actually have a great deal of perseverance and resilience, and actually don't take as much time off as you might think, or an equal amount to somebody else who is not being labelled as such might take when they are having life issues, divorces, moving house, sick children. It's really quite a balanced thing. Your mental health status officially may or may not affect what sick leave and how long you hold down a job for. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But my general answer is it would be difficult to hold down a job just in terms of getting up and keeping going all the time. My second part of my answer to that question is, because I'm a lived experience peer worker and I work in the lived experience peer workforce, it's then much easier because I'm in an identified peer role. I'm in several. That's an expected and normal part of our role. It is very much accepted and welcomed and supported, and I'm there because of the expertise I have from certain elements of distress or taking a break. And coincidentally, as it happens for me, I haven't really had any time off days off over a number of years, so I'm doing very well. But that doesn't mean that at some point this year, next year, or in 2 years, or I might just clap out, have a burnout, and want to take 3 months off. And I'm very fortunate to be in a career where I can manage all my roles and commitments. I'm pretty much self-employed anyway, which is another bonus of being a consultant and being a sessional academic at university. I can pick and choose my work. So that's very fortunate. So the answer is no, it's not difficult to hold down a job if you're in a lived experience peer workforce role, because you are there for everything else that you bring, and that's taken as a package. So in that respect can be very easy. I really appreciate the time you've taken to listen to this video today amongst Schizophrenia Awareness Week. I really hope that you enjoyed it, or at least found it interesting in some way, and you go off and have a think and reflect, and like and share away. And yeah, move forward with all these questions in your mind. And if you want to give me some more, come sign into the Warren Academy platform, the warren.academy. Get on our mailing list, which will be starting up soon, and these conversations can continue.